We will be discussing about the differences between the primary and the deciduous dentition. So under your general features, you have the number of teeth, dental formula, the size of the teeth, the color of the teeth, the eruption and the root formation. All these will be discussed under the general features of your differences between primary and the permanent teeth. So to start with the size of the teeth. If you look at the size of the teeth between the primary and the permanent dentition, your primary dentition will be overall smaller in size compared to your permanent dentition. Okay, and the dental formula, if you take, it is going to be 2 incisors, 1 canine and 2 molars in case of your primary, whereas in case of your permanent it is 2 incisors, a canine, 2 premolars and 3 molars. Okay, the size, coming back to the size, the primary tooth will be smaller in size. Exception is that your deciduous molars, okay, they are larger. So your deciduous molars are larger when compared to their permanent counterparts, which are your premolars. Okay, and see, this is the dental formula. You have 2 incisors, a canine and 2 molars, whereas in case of your permanent it is 2 incisors, a canine, 2 premolars and 3 molars in case of your permanent teeth. So the number of tooth, it is 20 in case of primary, and in case of permanent it is 32. The color of teeth. If you take, your deciduous teeth are more whiter. Why? Because they are less mineralized, okay, and they do not reflect the color of your underlying dentine, whereas your permanent teeth are more yellowish white or almost grayish. Why? Because they are more mineralized and they reflect the color of the underlying dentine. Moving on to the eruption of your primary and permanent teeth. Your primary teeth erupts from the age of 6 months to 2.5 years of age, and your permanent teeth, it is from 6 years to almost 22 to 25 years of age for the wisdom tooth. So the root formation, if you take, it is approximately 1 to 1.5 years after the eruption of the tooth in case of primary. Whereas in case of permanent dentition, the root formation takes about 3 years from the eruption for root formation in case of permanent teeth. Now moving on to the morphological differences between the primary and the permanent dentition. So first, to start with, it is your crown, then it will be followed by your root. So look at the differences in size between the crown of your primary and permanent dentition. If you take your primary dentition, it is more wider mesiodistally compared to your cervico-incisal dimensions, right? Whereas in case of your permanent dentition, the cervico-incisal measurement is more when compared to your mesiodistal dimensions. Overall, the size is going to be smaller, except for your which tooth? Deciduous molars. Okay, there alone the premolars are going to be smaller in size as compared to your deciduous molars, your permanent successors. Okay. Otherwise, the overall size is going to be smaller in size for your deciduous teeth. And remember the mesiodistal. Okay, the mesiodistal dimension of your deciduous teeth are more. Whereas in case of your permanent dentition, it is the cervico-incisal width that is going to be more. Okay, and these mamelons, okay, these mamelons are found on the incisal aspects of the anteriors in case of your permanent dentition, whereas these mamelons are absent on the deciduous dentition. Now moving on to the occlusal surface. Occlusal surface, if you see, the primary molars will have narrow occlusal table as compared to your permanent molars. This is due to the occlusal convergence that happens in case of your deciduous teeth. So the narrow occlusal table is due to the convergence in case of deciduous. And if you take the cervical bulge is more prominent, and the cervical constriction is also more prominent in case of the deciduous molars as compared to molars. And moving on to the roots. Okay, morphology of the roots. If you take, the roots are more slender and narrower in case of primary. And if you take, this is the root trunk. Okay, the root trunk, it is very small whereas the root trunk is very large in case of your permanent teeth. Why is the root trunk very small? Because the furcation is more towards the cervix in case of your primary dentition. Okay, then the apical foramens are also more in case of your primary dentition, and the pulp chamber, okay, the size of the pulp chamber is more, and the pulp horns are also more prominent and they are more at a higher position than the permanent dentition. So in your primary dentition, the crown, if you take, the mesiodistal dimension is more, okay, the cervical ridge is more prominent, the cervical constriction is more prominent, and mamelons are absent. Moving on to the differences in root, if you take, it is more narrower, okay, and the pulp chamber is very large, the pulp horns are more prominent and more superiorly placed, okay, and then if you take, see, look at the flare, okay, the flaring is more prominent in case of the primary dentition, even it is outside the mesiodistal dimension of the tooth, it projects outside, right? So this is to accommodate the developing or erupting permanent dentition, here to accommodate your premolars. This much of flaring is seen in the deciduous molars. So it is going to be the flaring, large pulp chamber, pulp horns, okay, and the short root trunk. Why? Because the furcation is more close to the region. So this is with respect to the general and morphological differences between primary and deciduous dentition, which you will discuss under general differences. Under morphology, it's going to be crown and